My name is Judy. I'm 71 years old, and 3 months ago, I stood in the doorway of the beach house my late husband and I built board by board, and I watched my own son hand my house keys to a real estate agent like they belonged to him. He didn't know I was standing right behind him. He didn't know I'd already changed the locks. And he definitely didn't know what was waiting for him 1 week later, when my lawyer knocked on that same front door and changed his life forever. Before I tell you how I took my house back, and how I made sure my son never forgot the lesson, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I read every single one of them, and honestly, on the hard nights, your comments are what keep me going. Now let's get into it. My husband Walter and I bought that stretch of land on the coast back in 1983. We didn't have money for fancy vacations back then. What we had was a beat-up truck, a tent, and a dream that someday we'd build something that would outlast us both. Every summer for 6 years, we drove down there with lumber strapped to the roof of that truck, and we built our house one weekend at a time. Walter did the framing. I did the windows and the paint. Our son, Brian, grew up running around that property barefoot, catching crabs in the tide pools, falling asleep on the porch swing before the fireworks even started on the 4th of July. That house wasn't just wood and glass to me. It was 38 years of our marriage. It was where Walter taught Brian to fish. It was where we scattered some of Walter's ashes, right off the end of the dock, the year he passed. So when Walter died 5 years ago, I made a decision. I wasn't going to sell that house. I wasn't going to let it sit empty and rot either. I decided I'd spend my summers there myself, and when I passed, it would go to Brian, free and clear, no strings attached. I even told him that, at Walter's funeral, of all places. I said, "Sweetheart, that beach house is yours one day. Just give your old mother some time to enjoy it first." He said, "Of course, Mom. Take all the time you need." I believed him. That's the part that still stings a little, even now. I believed him completely. Here's where things started to shift, and if you've been through something like this yourself, you already know, it never happens all at once. It happens in small pieces, so small you talk yourself out of noticing them. About 2 years ago, Brian and his wife, Kelly, started coming down to the beach house more often. At first I was thrilled. I thought, wonderful, my son wants to spend time with his old mother. We'd sit on the porch, drink sweet tea, watch the grandkids build sandcastles. It felt like the good old days. But slowly, the visits started to feel different. Kelly began talking about when this place is ours in front of me, like I wasn't even standing there. She'd walk through the rooms measuring things with her eyes, saying things like, "This wall would come down easy," or "We'd definitely repaint before we host anyone." Brian would laugh it off and say, "Kelly, Mom's still very much alive and kicking," but he never actually corrected her. He never once said, "This is Mom's house, not ours." I told myself I was being an overly sensitive old woman. I told myself my son loved me and none of it meant anything. Then, this past spring, I drove down for what was supposed to be a quiet 2 weeks by myself. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. Walter used to tease me for loving surprises, and old habits die hard. I pulled into that gravel driveway I knew like the back of my own hand, and there was a sign staked into my front lawn. A for sale sign. With my house on it. I sat in that car for a long moment, just staring at it, feeling like the ground had opened up underneath me. Then I got out, walked up to my own front porch, and there was my son, standing with a real estate agent in a sharp blazer, walking her through my living room like a tour guide. I heard him say, clear as day, "My wife and I are looking to close within 60 days if possible. We've got another property lined up already." I stood in that doorway and I did not say a word. I don't know if it was shock or something colder than shock. I just stood there and listened to my only child talk about selling the house his father built, the house that still had his father's handwriting penciled inside a closet door frame marking how tall Brian grew every summer, like it was nothing more than a line item on his to-do list. Now, if you're new to my channel, you should know something about me. I raised a son on my own for large stretches of time while Walter worked offshore. I ran our household budget down to the penny for 4 decades. I am not, and have never been, a pushover. So once the shock wore off, something in me went very calm, very quiet, and very focused. I didn't scream. I didn't cry, not in front of them anyway. I simply walked in, smiled at the real estate agent, and said, "I'm so sorry, there's been a misunderstanding. This home is not for sale. I'm Judy, I own this property." Then I looked at my son and said, "Brian, can we talk outside for a moment?" The look on his face. I wish I could bottle that look and hand it to every mother who's ever wondered if her children truly see her as a person, or just as a set of assets waiting to be inherited early. Out on that porch, Brian tried every angle. First it was concern, "Mom, you're 71, you shouldn't be maintaining a place like this alone, we're just trying to help." Then it shifted to entitlement, "You always said this was going to be mine someday anyway, we're just moving the timeline up a little." Then, when neither of those worked, it turned into something uglier, "You're being dramatic. This is exactly why people say you're getting difficult in your old age." Difficult. That was the word my son used on me, standing on the porch his father built with his own 2 hands, 3 feet from the door where we'd carved both of their heights into the frame every single summer of his childhood. I didn't argue with him. I didn't even raise my voice. I said, "Brian, I think you and Kelly should head home now. We'll talk soon." And then I went inside, and I locked the door behind me, and I sat down at Walter's old desk, and for the first time since Walter passed, I picked up the phone and called someone who could actually help me. Her name is Diane. She'd been Walter's estate attorney for the last several years of his life, and she'd stayed in touch with me since he passed, mostly just Christmas cards and the occasional check-in call. When I told her what had happened, she went quiet for a moment, and then she said something I will never forget. She said, "Judy, I need you to understand something clearly. Nothing in that house belongs to Brian yet. Not 1 square inch. Whatever he told that agent, whatever paperwork he thinks exists, none of it is real unless you signed it. Did you sign anything?" I told her no. I hadn't signed a single document. Not a deed transfer, not a power of attorney, nothing. She laughed, actually laughed, not unkindly, and said, "Then your son just tried to sell a house he doesn't own, to a stranger, without the actual owner's knowledge or consent. Judy, depending on how far this went, that's not just a family disagreement. That could be fraud." I sat with that word for a long time after we hung up the phone. Fraud. My own son. Diane and I spent the next week putting a plan together. First thing was simple, I had the locks changed the very next morning, all of them, including the shed and the boathouse. Second, Diane pulled records and found out that Brian had, in fact, already had that real estate agent draft up preliminary listing paperwork, using a forged authorization letter with my signature scanned and pasted from an old birthday card I'd mailed him years ago. My own handwritten love, Mom on a birthday card, lifted and used to try and sell my house out from under me. Third, and this was the part that mattered most to me, I updated my will. The old version left the beach house to Brian outright, no conditions. The new version was different. Very different. 1 week after that day on the porch, Brian and Kelly showed up at the beach house again, unannounced this time, probably assuming I'd calmed down and we could smooth things over the way families sometimes pretend to. I let them in. I offered them sweet tea, just like always. And right on schedule, there was a knock at the door. It was Diane. She walked in with a leather folder under her arm, introduced herself calmly and professionally, and sat down at the kitchen table across from my son. She laid out, in plain language, exactly what she'd found. The forged letter. The listing agreement signed without my authorization. The real estate agent, who, once she'd learned the truth, was more than willing to cooperate and hand over every document Brian had given her. I watched my son's face go through about 5 different colors. Kelly's mouth actually fell open. Brian tried the same tired lines, "This is a misunderstanding, we were just getting a..." Diane simply asked him one question, "Would you like to explain to your mother why her signature appears on a document she never signed?" Nobody had an answer for that. Here's what I decided to do, and I want to be honest with you about this part, because I know some of you might have handled it differently, and that's okay. I did not press criminal charges. Diane told me I absolutely could have, that forgery and attempted fraud are serious matters, and part of me, the hurt part, wanted to. But I thought about Walter, and I thought about my grandchildren, who did not deserve to watch their father dragged through a courtroom because of choices he made. So instead, I chose a different kind of consequence. One that I believed would actually mean something. I told Brian that the beach house would never be his outright. Instead, in my new will, the house goes into a trust. My grandchildren will inherit it when they turn 25, held in trust until then, managed by Diane's firm, with clear instructions that it can never be sold, only passed down, generation to generation, exactly the way Walter and I always dreamed it would be. Brian gets to keep visiting, as my son, for as long as I'm alive and as long as he treats me and this house with the respect they deserve. But he will never own it. Never control it. Never be able to put a for sale sign in that yard again. I also told him something else, something that had nothing to do with lawyers or paperwork. I told him that trust, once it's broken by your own child, doesn't just come back because you apologize once at a kitchen table with a lawyer sitting there watching. I told him he had years of work ahead of him if he ever wanted his mother to look at him the way she used to. It's been 3 months now since that day. Brian has, to his credit, actually tried. He calls every Sunday. He drove down last month, alone, no Kelly, and spent the whole weekend fixing the fence out back without me even asking him to. We haven't fully healed, not yet, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you everything is perfect now, because that wouldn't be honest, and I promised myself a long time ago I'd only ever be honest with you all on this channel. But I'll tell you what has healed. My relationship with myself. For years, I think I convinced myself that being a good mother meant being endlessly available, endlessly forgiving, endlessly willing to hand over whatever my son wanted, whenever he wanted it, just to keep the peace. What I learned this spring, standing in that doorway watching a stranger walk through my living room, is that peace built on being erased isn't peace at all. It's just quiet surrender with a nicer name. I still go down to that beach house every summer. I still sit on that porch swing at sunset, and some evenings I swear I can still hear Walter's laugh carried in on the wind off the water. But now, when I sit there knowing that house is mine, that it will always belong to the people I choose, in the way I choose, for as long as I have breath to make that choice. Nobody, not even my own son, gets to decide that for me. If you take one thing away from my story tonight, let it be this: your age does not make your voice smaller. Your kindness is not an invitation for people to take what isn't theirs. And it is never, ever too late to stand in your own doorway and say, "This is still mine." Thank you all so much for sitting with me through this one. If this story meant something to you, please give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and down in the comments, tell me where in the world you're watching from tonight. I love seeing just how far these stories travel. And if you've ever had to take a stand to protect something you built with your own 2 hands, I want to hear that story too. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and take care of what's yours.